February 3rd, 2026, Arabian Sea, 500 miles from Iran's coast. An Iranian drone is airborne, and it's heading straight for USS Abraham Lincoln. Not circling, not loitering at distance, not turning away, heading directly for the carrier and closing. The crew on the Lincoln watches the radar contact moving toward them across 500 miles of open water. De-escalatory measures broadcast on international frequencies. The drone keeps flying. International waters, an American carrier strike group, and one Iranian drone that will not stop. That was the moment Iran made the biggest strategic miscalculation of 2026. What happened in the 25 days that followed turned one drone approach into the largest U.S. military buildup in the Middle East in over 2 decades and helped trigger a campaign that dismantled the largest portion of any navy since the Second World War. 3 Iranian platforms, 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 1 tanker, 1 24-hour window. The drone approaching Abraham Lincoln was the first move. Hours later, same day, 2 IRGC Navy gunboats and a second Iranian drone closed on a U.S.-flagged commercial tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to board and seize the vessel. The IRGC was probing 2 separate layers of American power simultaneously: the carrier defense envelope 500 miles offshore, and the choke point defense layer at the strait itself. Both probes failed. Both failures were recorded, and both fed directly into the authorization chain that sent 3 American carrier strike groups, F-22 Raptors, F-35 squadrons, and 50,000 personnel into the CENTCOM area of responsibility. Iran spent 1 day testing what America would do. America spent 25 days showing them. To understand what happened on February 3rd, 2026, you need to understand where USS Abraham Lincoln was and what Iran thought it was testing. The Lincoln CVN-72 departed San Diego in November 2025. By January 26, 2026, it had arrived in the CENTCOM area of responsibility and taken up position in the Arabian Sea. That is the wide-open body of water east of the Arabian Peninsula between the Horn of Africa and India's western coastline south of Iran's coast. Carrier Strike Group 3, Carrier Air Wing 9 embarked, approximately 5,000 personnel aboard Carrier Air Wing 9. Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 314, the Black Knights, the only F-35C unit in the air wing. They had been running flight operations since the deployment began. So, patrols, surveillance, presence missions, routine. The morning of February 3rd was not routine. At some point during daylight hours, an Iranian Shahed 139 drone was detected approaching USS Abraham Lincoln from the direction of Iran's southern coastline. Per CENTCOM Captain Tim Hawkins, the drone continued to fly toward the ship despite de-escalatory measures taken by U.S. forces operating in international waters. That sentence matters. U.S. forces broadcast warnings, standard procedure, radio calls on international frequencies established under decades of rules of engagement for exactly this scenario. The drone received the warnings. It continued flying. That decision, made somewhere in the IRGC command chain on the Iranian coast, set everything else in motion. The Shahed 139 is not the version you have seen flying into Ukrainian apartment buildings. That is the 136, the small delta wing kamikaze variant. The 139 is the long-range reconnaissance variant, larger airframe, operational range up to 2,000 kilometers, designed to find targets, photograph them, transmit the imagery back to controllers, and return. It had made approaches toward U.S. naval assets before. It had always come back. Iranian planners had reason to believe this run would be the same, that the U.S. would issue warnings, the drone would complete its observation pass, and both sides would note the exchange and move on. What Iran did not account for was the Black Knights already being airborne. A single F-35C Lightning II from VMFA-3-14 launched from Abraham Lincoln's flight deck. 1 aircraft, CENTCOM confirmed the engagement. The Shahed 139 was destroyed before it reached the carrier. Its last transmission was a routine navigation update to its controllers on the coast. Then silence. No distress signal, no final data burst. The drone simply stopped transmitting, and Iran's operators had no radar return to explain why. Because the aircraft that killed it was never visible on their screens. That was the first engagement. Hours later, the second probe began. MT Stina Imperative. a U.S.-flagged tanker chartered by U.S. Military Sealift Command and managed by Sweden's Stena Bull, was transiting the Strait of Hormuz when two IRGC Navy gunboats moved to intercept. A Mohajer drone provided aerial observation above the vessels. The Iranian forces threatened to board and seize the tanker. This is a tactic the IRGC has used before against commercial shipping in the strait. Pull alongside, threaten the crew, force the vessel to divert toward Iranian waters, and present the seizure as a response to sanctions or legal disputes. USS McFall, DDG-74, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was operating independently in the Persian Gulf, not attached to the carrier strike group at that moment, pre-positioned specifically for this scenario. McFall responded, escorted the Stena Imperative to safety, and U.S. Air Force assets provided defensive air support from regional bases. The IRGC gunboats broke off. The boarding failed. 2 engagements, 2 American wins, same day, and both of them recorded, documented, and cited by Pentagon planners in the days that followed. Why the Shahed never had a chance. The Shahed 139 was flying a 500-mile straight-line approach. No evasive maneuvers, no electronic countermeasures, no radar warning receiver capable of detecting an F-35C in passive sensor mode. It was a reconnaissance platform and not a combat aircraft. It was built to observe and survive through obscurity, not to fight. The F-35C Lightning II is the opposite problem for any adversary. Combat radius on internal fuel alone, exceeding 600 nautical miles. The Lincoln was 500 miles from Iran's coastline. That means the F-35C reached the intercept point without external drop tanks, which matters because external tanks break the stealth profile. Clean configuration, no radar return spikes from pylon-mounted hardware. The aircraft flew the entire engagement invisible to Iranian coastal air defense radar. The AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned radar can detect and track low RCS slow-moving targets, exactly what a Shahed 139 is at cruise altitude and speed. But the pilot had options beyond the radar. The distributed aperture system runs 6 infrared cameras around the entire airframe simultaneously, building a full spherical threat picture regardless of which direction the aircraft is pointing. The F-35C was tracking the Shahed 139 before it ever needed to announce itself with a radar emission, passive acquisition, no warning to the drone's operators, internal weapons bay, AIM-120 AMRAM loaded. Active radar homing, effective range well beyond 100 kilometers, fire and forget after launch. AM-9X Sidewinder as backup. Infrared seeker, high off-bore sight capability can engage a target the pilot isn't even directly facing. 1 missile. The Shahed 139 was destroyed at range. Iran's radar operators on the coast had a clean screen, then an absent contact, and no explanation that fit any threat profile in their database. This was the first recorded combat shootdown of an Iranian drone by an F-35C Lightning II. The Black Knights returned to the Lincoln's flight deck, the pilot was debriefed, flight operations resumed, and in the Pentagon's J-2 Directorate, analysts who had been watching Iran's drone operations for months were already on the phone, because the drone being shot down was not the story. The drone approaching in the first place was the destroyer layer. The second Iranian probe that day ran into a different kind of answer, and it failed for a reason Iran should have anticipated. USS McFall operating independently in the Persian Gulf was not a coincidence. It was doctrine. The U.S. Navy does not park its carrier 500 miles offshore and hope that the choke point takes care of itself. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are pre-positioned in and around the strait specifically to cover scenarios the carrier cannot respond to in time. 2-tiered deployment, carrier far offshore, maximum air power, maximum strike reach, destroyer in the choke point, immediate response to surface threats, escort capability, close air defense. The Arleigh Burke class carries the AN/SPY-1D phased array radar, a system that simultaneously tracks hundreds of air and surface contacts across multiple threat vectors. McFall knew about the IRGC gunboats and the Mohajer drone before the boarding attempt fully developed. The destroyer was already moving before the threat was fully declared. The IRGC gunboats involved were Pekap class fiberglass hulls, 42 knots at full speed, each one carrying anti-ship missiles and crewed for harassment and boarding operations. The tactic is not designed for a straight fight with a destroyer. It is designed to exploit the gap between a distant carrier and the commercial vessel being targeted, move fast, threaten the crew, achieve the seizure before a heavyweight response can arrive. Speed over armor, numbers over firepower. McFall closed the gap. U.S. Air Force fighter coverage arrived overhead. The Mohajer drone, a heavier tactical UAV with optical observation capability, had no operating room once American air was on station above the strait. The gunboats broke off. The Stena Imperative was escorted clear. The tanker captain filed his report. The Swedish management company issued a statement. Military Sealift Command confirmed the vessel's safe passage. And somewhere in the IRGC Navy command structure, officers were writing their own report, explaining why a tanker seizure that had worked before against other vessels on other days failed this time. The answer was McFall, and the answer was F-35 coverage overhead from regional bases, and the answer was that the two-tier U.S. deployment meant the response was never going to be slow. Iran probed the outer layer, they found the F-35C, they probed the inner layer, they found the Arleigh Burke. And by doing both on the same day, they handed the Pentagon exactly what it needed. Here is the number. Iran did not wargame. 3 Iranian platforms approached U.S. assets on February 3, 2026. 1 Shahed 139 toward USS Abraham Lincoln. 2 gunboats and 1 Mohajer drone toward MT Stena Imperative. 3 platforms. 1 day, that was the operation. Now count the response. Within 24 hours of the incident, the Pentagon ordered USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, America's most advanced carrier, to steam from the Atlantic toward CENTCOM. Within days, approximately a dozen F-22 Raptors deployed to Avda Air Base in Israel, the first deployment of U.S. offensive air power on Israeli soil. 18 additional F-35As repositioned from RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom to Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. USS Boxer and USS Tripoli, both amphibious assault ships carrying embarked F-35B squadrons, redirected from the Pacific. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, the U.S. military's standing rapid response force in the Indo-Pacific, ordered out of its patrol area and sent west. THAAD batteries pulled from the Korean Peninsula. Patriot transport erector launchers redeployed across the region. More than 100 C-17 Globemaster and C-5 Galaxy cargo flights moved equipment and personnel into the CENTCOM area of responsibility in the weeks that followed. HH-60W Jolly Green, 2 combat search and rescue helicopters pre-positioned. By February 16th, 13 days after Iran's 3 platforms made their approach, USS Abraham Lincoln's carrier strike group had moved to a position 700 kilometers off Iran's coast near Oman, within lethal strike range of the Iranian mainland. February 28th, 25 days after February 3rd, Operation Epic Fury opened. CENTCOM struck over 1,000 Iranian targets in the first 24 hours. By the end of the campaign's first phase, 9,000 targets struck, 140 Iranian vessels damaged or destroyed, 4 Soleimani-class warships eliminated, 16 dedicated mine layer vessels sunk. The largest naval elimination in a single campaign since the Second World War, 3 Iranian platforms, 3 American carrier strike groups, every F-22 Raptor in the CENTCOM plan, 3 Marine Expeditionary Units, B-2 Spirit bombers, 50,000 service members. That is the return Iran received on 3 drones. Resolution and forward cost. The cost of that deployment is not theoretical. As of April 2026, 3 U.S. carrier strike groups are operating simultaneously in the Middle East, the largest naval concentration in the region in over 20 years. Each carrier strike group costs approximately $6.5 million per day to keep at sea. 3 carriers, $19.5 million every day, over $1 billion per month in carrier operating costs alone. Before a single F-35C sortie, before a single GBU-72 bunker buster, before a single helicopter flight hour is counted, USS Gerald R. Ford has been deployed over 300 days by the time Operation Epic Fury's first phase closes, longer than any U.S. carrier has deployed since Vietnam. The maintenance backlog that accumulates from a 300-day deployment does not disappear when the carrier comes home. It cascades through the shipyard schedule at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, through the availability of the next carrier, through the readiness timeline for the one after that. The ripple runs for years. Every carrier in the Persian Gulf is a carrier not operating in the Pacific. Every THAAD battery pulled from Korea is a gap in the deterrence posture Indo-Pacific Command maintains against Chinese military contingencies. Per analyst Brian Clark at the Hudson Institute, the extended deployment cycles for Lincoln, Ford, and Bush created cascading maintenance delays that will affect U.S. global naval readiness well into 2027. Beijing's military planners noted the THAAD redeployments. They recorded which corridors became thinner. Now consider the Iranian side of that equation. Iran has thousands of drones. The Shahed 139 shot down on February 3rd was replaced before the week ended. One drone costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture. The IRGC absorbs that loss and orders production to continue. The asymmetry Iran was counting on, cheap platforms testing an expensive adversary, is real. It is built into their doctrine deliberately. Spend $100,000 in drones to force the United States to spend $1 billion in carrier operating costs. That is the calculation. What the IRGC did not calculate was the Pentagon's authorization threshold. The United States does not respond to drone incidents by matching drone for drone. It responds to documented Iranian aggression against U.S. warships and U.S.-flagged commercial vessels in international waters by authorizing the force package that eliminates the capability entirely. February 3rd gave the Pentagon 2 documented incidents on the same day. One drone approaching a carrier in international waters despite explicit warnings. One attempted seizure of a U.S.-flagged vessel carrying cargo for Military Sealift Command. Both on record, both cited in the authorization chain for what followed. The F-35C pilot from VMFA 314, who launched from Abraham Lincoln on February 3rd and destroyed that Shahed 139 was flying combat sorties over Iran during the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury 25 days later. The same squadron, the same carrier. The drone he shot down on February 3rd was one of the specific events the authorization documents named. Iran's intelligence objective on February 3rd was to probe U.S. response thresholds, to learn what rules of engagement governed the carrier strike group, how fast the destroyer response was at the Strait, and whether the United States would accept harassment operations as a cost of presence in the region. They wanted data. They got data. The F-35C intercept told them the carrier's outer defensive envelope was active and invisible. The McFall response told them the destroyer layer was faster than the swarm model assumed. And 25 days of Operation Epic Fury told them what happens when Iran provides the Pentagon with documented justification to eliminate a threat permanently rather than manage it incrementally. Iran sent 3 drones at 1 American carrier. America sent 3 carrier strike groups, F-22 Raptors, F-35 squadrons, B-2 bombers, and 50,000 troops. The 3 drones were one of the worst tactical decisions Iran ever made.